Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Welcome back to the Kiana Canada Show. We are recording in a different location today. I'm in my accommodation, and today we are going to be speaking about indirect, covert racism. Before we get into today's topic, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Remember that your likes and your shares, what it does is it pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that these videos are important. But we must be reminded that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, that does not mean that videos like this are not important. So if you have been following the videos that I've uploaded, you come to understand that I just recently uploaded a video that toward the end of one video, I was talking about what the definition of what white supremacy is. It's really not about a specific person. It's not saying that a group is collectively white supremacists, and that's nothing that I argue. It's really about a prejudicial feeling to say that only fair-skinned or white people can be in superior positions. And so I want to go in deeply about that today, about institutional racism and how that is being perpetrated here in Northern Ireland. Of course, we know that in the United States of America, racism is quite different from in Northern Ireland. So I want to talk about these two facets of racism. In the United States, racism is more so overt. That means that you can come across a person that has prejudicial feelings, and they will you may come across a person that will say a racial epithet or stereotype you, and obviously you have institutions that will back those feelings up. Whereas here in Northern Ireland, the racialized practices is very covert. So whereas in the United States, you have an overt practice such as being stopped on the highway by law enforcement officers and they're asking for your identification, or there is a arbitrary execution on the highway, and then the court system is coming into play. The court system is exonerating that officer that engaged in that wrongful death. In Northern Ireland, it's quite different, and it is passive aggressive. And I think that when we discuss racism here in Northern Ireland, I think that there is a misinterpretation about what it really is and what it really means. And we're going to get into that. So a few months ago, I attended a symposium on Let's Not Talk About Racism at Queen's University Belfast. And in this symposium, there was discussions. It was really, the symposium was really about researchers showcasing their research on what they believe to be racism. And really it was about racism against specific social groups such as Muslims. Predominantly that was what the research was about. But there was, I think, a woman that was within this group who showcased her research on what she felt was racism, and that was where she argued that in Belfast that there was not how did she say it? I think she was saying that like in Belfast, like Irish people were not open to dating outside of their race, and that they were more sexualized, is the research that she put forward. Now, I have opinions about that, but I didn't raise, uh, I didn't voice my opinions about that in the group, nor am I going to raise my opinions about that now. Like, if she and I had a conversation, I think that would be like an appropriate time to actually discuss her research. But what I'm learning and what I'm discovering is, of course, to reiterate, that racism is a chameleon here in Northern Ireland, and it morphs into, it shapeshifts. So it doesn't always come into one specific form, as some may think. So when groups, anti-racism groups, when they come together and they rally together and they talk about what they believe to be racism, they often talk about overt forms of racism, such as the far right protesters having these prejudicial feelings against migrants, and then other incidents to them that would point to a racialized practice. And and I've raised the argument that while that is touching upon prejudice, it also touches upon xenophobia. It does not necessarily touch upon racism, because of those incidents, those persons were being prosecuted. And in order to practice racism, you need to have prejudice plus power, and you need to have institutions to back those racialized feelings up, to say that those racialized feelings are okay. So let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, I'll give myself as an example. I was a student at Queen's University Belfast. I was going to write my dissertation on transnational repression. My dissertation was going to exclusively look at countries in the global north who are also perpetrating the practice of transnational repression. I felt that there was a lacuna the lacuna needed to be filled. And I also felt that there was a saturation of research as it relates to states in the global south that have exercised and perpetrated these practices. And I think that I felt like it was redundant. Some of the research is redundant because we're seeing the same countries over and over and over and over, but we're not really actually focusing on other countries that are perpetrating transnational repression. And so when I sought to write that dissertation, and my university pointed to an email that I wrote that was actually in adherence to the student charter, and pointed to that email as grounds as to why I should not be in the university. So basically, I contacted the dissertation office, or the dissertation administrator, and I was like, I really would like a different dissertation supervisor. I feel like there could be a conflict of interest between myself and this supervisor that I currently do have, because of a piece that this person wrote on the transatlantic slave trade. That does not mean that he is a bad person. That does not mean that he is not a phenomenal professor. It just means that I want someone that's more aligned with the research that I seek to conduct. And they use that email to put me through, they use that email to actually put me out of the university. And it sounds ludicrous, but that's exactly, in essence, what happened. And you can see that my focus in my research was going to be how the global north profiles specific groups, specifically Black Americans, and puts them through transnational repression. There have been a number of Black Americans that have fled the United States and filed asylum against the United States because the United States is not a safe country. And because I sought to examine those concerns, and not only examine them, but to really research it fully, and to publish those concerns in a piece that could be published in a journal, my research was stopped by institutions. And so that's kind of the elongated version of what institutional racism is. It's where institutions have a hand in perpetuating or perpetrating racism. And why, you may say, well, Kiana, they may have stopped your research because it wasn't about racism, that it was about the dissertation topic alone. But I would argue that that is incorrect, that they would not have done that to a white American had a white American sought to write their dissertation on transnational repression. They would not have put a white American through the same practices that they put me through had a white American filed asylum. Now, that is not an argument that Americans that are not Black have not faced intimidation on an asylum claim. This is an argument that what I've experienced with institutions directly involved is a racialized practice, and that I am under the impression and of the belief that these institutions would not have engaged in this practice if I were white. For example, when I was trying to deliver my summons to Queen's University Belfast, I respectfully came onto campus, and because I have to deliver it myself, I respectfully came onto campus and tried to deliver it to Queen's University. And then I had several security guards trying to stop me from delivering the summons, right? And I was like, listen, I'm just here to deliver this summons. And once I give it to the appropriate person, then I'm off the campus. And they surrounded me. So what they were trying to do was to intimidate me by surrounding me. So there was like 3 of them surrounding me on the staircase in this very small space. And so I did feel intimidated by their presence. And so I left from where I was and ran downstairs, and I was like, hey, like, I'm being intimidated. And then there was this off-duty PSNI officer that pushed me against the wall. Quite, ironic, right? Because there is case law that says like the weak should not be pushed against the wall. And so I don't know if that was the PSNI's intent to do that. Of course, they have been looking into my research, surveilling my content and paying close attention to it. I don't know why. Like, I mean, don't they have better things to do? But at any rate, I was pushed to the wall by this off-duty police officer because I was like, hey, these security guards are intimidating me. And his excuse was that there was a protected person within the space that which I was trying to get assistance in. But do you push a victim against a wall? Like, if they're saying, help me, I'm being intimidated, you don't push them against a wall, right? So that is also like another form of institutional racism, right? You have structures in place that are upholding those prejudicial feelings. And going deeply into this situation where I was trying to deliver this summons, so there was heavy duty intimidation by the security guards at Queen's University. And then I left that space and I went into the student union and I was like, hey, I am just trying to deliver this summons. Once I do that, I am off this campus. Uh, and they came to Queen, they followed me to the student union and they were trying to intimidate and embarrass me in front of my cohorts by surrounding me. And so, interestingly, ladies and gentlemen, there was a student that was there at Queen's University. She was a white student and she was paying attention to everything that was happening. And like her eyes was glued on this incident. And where I would go, like she would follow and she was glued to it. And she was like, okay, like there's something going on here. And so she came to me and she's like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, let me walk with you because like it looks like they're trying to intimidate you. So let me walk with you. And she says, I think she's an activist. And I think she's an activist. And she was like, let me walk with you because it looks as if they're trying to intimidate you. And I was like, okay. And so she walked with me and then she's like, well, what are you trying to do? Like, what's going on? I was like, I'm just trying to deliver this summons because they're trying to stop me from doing that. So that's all I'm doing. And I told them that I would deliver this summons and then I would be off the campus once I did that. And she said, okay, well, she said, that's what you need to do. And I was like, yes, that's what I need to do. She's like, well, come on, let's go do it. And I was like, I don't want you to get in trouble and I don't want them to put you off the campus and I don't want to interfere with your education. And she was like, no worry. Like, I understand what you're trying to do. And she said, what you're trying to do is you're in the right. And she said, so come on, let's do it. So she, before she did that, she was like, she said, what are you trying to do? I said, I am trying to deliver the summons. I let her look at it. And that's why she said, I think you're in the right. So come on, let's go. And so she and I walked and we were walking and the security guards were still blocking our path, but they weren't being aggressive like they were when she wasn't there. And so they didn't let myself and this student they didn't let us in to deliver the summons. So when we left, she and we actually walked to the student union and they did not block my path when I was trying to go in. So when she walked me in there, they allowed me to go in with her. You see, because there was somebody else that recognized what they were doing was wrong, that they moved back on their illegal behavior. And that is the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we're silent about injustices such as what I've been through here in Northern Ireland, that is saying that it is okay. But when somebody stands up to those injustices, then we could stop that. And so she walked me, we walked in together into the student union and she was like, this woman is trying to deliver a summons to personnel within the university. I believe she's in the right. Who is the person that we could actually give this to? And so they, poor guy, because there was like this receptionist, he was just a student, and the security guards were surrounding us as well. And so because of the security guards were surrounding us, I think that he was like, flustered by that. And so like he was trying to get us the information and the details, ladies and gentlemen. And then she made the phone call and she contacted the administration office and she said, hey, there's a woman who previously went to this university. She's trying to deliver a summons. She's being intimidated by security guards. That's all she's trying to do. Can you please tell us if there's a person that can come down and collect the summons? And there was a person that came down to collect the summons. And you see how simple that was, right? But for their actions, but for their intimidation, that was not necessary. That's all that needed to happen in the first place. But what they were trying to do was they were trying to create a situation to where they hoped that I would become uh, that they hoped I would come undone. They were trying to create a situation that they hoped that I would, become boisterous, and that I would become frustrated, and that I would misplace my anger, and that they could say, oh, the big black boogie woman, look at this person. And because I didn't allow them to do that, and because I stood in my truth, someone else saw me stand in my truth. And that's what's very important. And I think that that's what we should take from this conversation today, is that we need to stand in our truth. Now, there is going to be organizations that are tasked and that have a mandate and a remit to protect us when we do stand in our truth. But they're not going to do that because they really don't believe in the principles that they say that they believe in. So, for example, for 2 years, ladies and gentlemen, for 2 years, I have gone to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. And for 2 years, I have made every effort to explain my circumstances to the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission in greater detail. I have even researched my cases, my human rights. So, for example, I cite a number of human rights violations. I've researched that in greater detail so that actually demonstrates to them that I am up to speed on my own victimization, but also that it helps them to understand exactly where I'm coming from, and that there's not a lot of work that they need to do in order to represent my case. So it's like a blueprint. Hey, this is what I've experienced. This is where the law is arguing, or where the court has held that these circumstances are unlawful and against the convention. And this is all you need to do to raise a concern in the press or to represent my case. And the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission has been reluctant and reticent to do that. And the question is why? And the answer is because the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission does not protect all people. The Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission has a very narrow mandate. And so when I tell you the people that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission protects, ladies and gentlemen, this is not hate speech. This is not an incitement to violence. This is not hate against any particular social group. This is my speaking honestly and truthfully about what I've witnessed. And it is a video that's in the public's interest. The Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission only has to reiterate, a very narrow mandate. And if you are not Irish, or if you're not from Islam, they are not going to take your case. And that's just the truth. And I'm not ashamed to say that. Now, I think with the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission that if you're from Islam, that you are going to be bumped up. And because, for example, there was an Irish woman that I had seen coming to the commission and they did not take her case. I don't really know the details of her case. I didn't ask the details of her case. But what I know about the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission is that they're only taking cases from people that are from Islam. And this gets me to the crux of this discussion, is that I believe, and if you disagree with me, then we can have a discussion or debate about this on Teams, on Google Meet, on Skype, whatever platform, face-to-face discussion. But I believe that the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, as well as other institutions in Northern Ireland, ladies and gentlemen, that they're using the Palestinian cause to uphold white supremacy. Now you may say, well, Kiana, what do you mean by that? That sounds ludicrous, because the Palestinians are not white. They are Arab, and they are, that's antithetical to white supremacy, right? But if you look at it like this, ladies and gentlemen, there are some people that don't want to have an opinion on the war, and that's could be for a number of reasons. One reason could be that they're anti-war. Another reason could be because they just don't like countries that are funding war. It could be just that their country is in conflict with what's going on in Israel, Palestine. There could be a number of reasons as to why people don't want to hold an opinion on the war that's happening in Israel, Palestine. But what I've learned since I've been here in Northern Ireland is that there's been an energy from groups of trying to push you into having an opinion about Israel, Palestine. So, for example, when I first started my podcast, you can go back to my videos. One of the when I first started it, I clearly stated that my podcast was not going to cover any humanitarian issues. And I said that my activism was not going to be humanitarian based. And the reason for that was because I didn't know a lot about humanitarian issues. I wasn't educated on it. And my education was really I was trying to streamline my activism and my post just to be about human rights violations and not humanitarian violations. These are two separate issues. And although they are interconnected to some degree, I think that most scholars would agree that laws in the humanitarian space is quite different from laws in the human rights space. So to be clear, when we're talking about humanitarian conflicts, we are often looking at criminal law, international criminal law. So we're looking at the International Court of Justice in the International Criminal Court. Whereas when we're looking at human rights violations, we're looking at really a civil-based law, and we're looking at courts such as the European Court of Human Rights, often the Human Rights Commission, etc. So there are two different bodies of law, and although sometimes they do interconnect, it is quite different. So I made a promise that I wasn't going to delve into a lot of humanitarian issues, although I did cite some humanitarian issues in case law in my articles. That wasn't going to be my focus. But from that point on, like last year, up until the point that I ended my contract with Queen's University on the 6th of August, I've had people trying to push me into giving a opinion about Israel and Palestine. This happened at the university. This happened just on the streets here in Northern Ireland. And so, for example, when I was going to so they were doing face paintings, and I seen people with like these beautiful flower paintings, colorful flower paintings on their face. And I was like, hey, cool, I want that. And so I went to the people that were doing that because, of course, it was in this space where people were getting that done. And when they came to me, I don't know if they were instructed to do that, but when I left away from that space, they had painted a Palestinian flag on my face. And I didn't ask them to do that. I didn't ask them to do that at all. So why didn't I get the flowers that I asked for? And yet when I left that space, you had painted a Palestinian flag on my face. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I think this was coming from Irish intelligence agencies that instructed them to do that. Like if this person So for example, before I sat down, or when I sat down to get my face painted, she was the artist was on the phone for a long time, like texting for a long time. And of course, that didn't mean anything to me. Like, I didn't mind that. And that's an implication, but she could be texting anybody. So I'm not saying that she was texting an Irish intelligence officer. But what I do know is that when I left from her space, I had left with a Palestinian flag on my face when I didn't ask for that. That's one issue. The second issue is I had a confidential informant come into my space. She alleged that her name was Nora, and she was trying to push me into this conservative space, like, oh, she is supporting Trump, and she kept bringing Trump up, and saying that's who she was for. And I was like, well, cool, that's you're for Trump, no problem. Like, that doesn't mean I'm going to stop talking to you. But I noticed that when she would ask me questions, they were always not inquisitory. They were more like interrogatories and adversarial. It wasn't like she was having a discussion with me. It was like she was trying to bait me into an answer that fit a particular narrative. And one of those narratives was the conflict with Israel and Palestine. So, for example, I told her, like, I was in support of Cornel West. I supported his presidency, and you can look on to my Substack as to why I supported his presidency. But she was like, why? Why do you support his presidency? Is it because he's in supporting Palestine? And like, it was just so weird, So that was a second situation. The third situation happened in my university, where there was this one particular student. I'm not going to say their name, but every time, like, I had them in multiple classes, and for the most part, like, my classes were the highlight of my life. I saw my being at Queen's University as sanctuary away from transnational repression. I enjoyed going to Clay Library. I enjoyed going to the graduate school, and I enjoyed being in my classes as well. And I had this one student who was a Palestinian supporter that she was in a number of my classes, and anytime that I spoke out about a particular issue, which did not have anything to do with Palestine, she would passive aggressively make it appear as if she was challenging what I was saying, but it was really just like a way to antagonize me. And then in other classes where there were discussions about Israel and Palestine, she would always make it known that she was in support of Palestine. Like, for example, like, the discussion didn't even have to do with Israel and Palestine. And she would say, well, we need to talk about Palestine and what's going on there. And like, so we would talk about, like, human rights issues, and the topic would be about a specific country and a specific human rights violation. And she would always shift it to Palestine. And so at that point, ladies and gentlemen, I had not made a decision as to whether, like, I wanted to support Palestine or Israel, because, again, like I said, I didn't know. I was ignorant on humanitarian issues. I did not know enough about the conflict between Israel and Palestine. As we know, that this conflict goes back to 1948. It goes back to the time that Jewish people fled Germany away from the Holocaust there, and they fled to Israel. And, I think that was like in 1938 where they were leaving, and then in 1948. So that was like the time. And of course, I didn't know what happened at all between that time and the time now. And so when I spoke to her, as I often want to do, is I want to have these conversations and hear various viewpoints about why people believe what they believe. She told me why she was in support of the Palestinian movement and the Palestinian people. And while I could sympathize and also empathize with her position, she didn't persuade me. And that's not because like I am a warmonger or that I am condoning what is happening abroad, that I'm anti-war. It's just that when I hear these arguments, I don't hear the people that are putting them into circulation talking about it being wrong everywhere. So, like, I'm not hearing people say that starving children everywhere is wrong. And if, in my personal opinion, like, if you are against that act, if you're against that, right, shouldn't you be against it everywhere that it occurs? And I guess that's the problem that I have, is I feel like sometimes we're only looking at the Palestinian movement because it is popular. And I'm a person, like, I look at it in its totality and in its entirety. And I say, no, none of this should happen to any group. I don't care who they are. It shouldn't happen to any group. But with specific groups, they're saying, no, it shouldn't happen only to this one group. And that is the problem that I have with that. And so I went on a tangent, but what do you think about that? Like, I support any activist or student's position to believe what they want to believe. But what they were trying to do was that they were trying to bully me into holding specific opinions. And ladies and gentlemen, let me be clear about this. Any position that I chose would have been wrong. For example, right now I said I stand in solidarity with Jewish people because of the shared history that we have and because they've supported me when I was in the United States. The support wasn't financial. It was just more of the experience that I had with them. Whereas my experience with the other side has been hostile. But don't mistake it. Any position that I would have chose would have been wrong for these people. So, for example, they were trying to bait me into saying that I was for Palestine so that they could actually segregate me and group me into a group of people that they could call extremists, right? And because I wouldn't fall for that, and I said, okay, well, this is where I stand because of your bullying, now they've isolated me because of that. So let me be clear. No matter what I would have chose, the same result would have occurred. It would have been the same result because these people that were coming to me weren't coming to me in good faith. It wasn't a good faith conversation. They were being instructed to come to me by intelligence agencies. We all know, come on, ladies and gentlemen, can we be real? Can we be real for a second? You know when you're having a legitimate discussion or debate with somebody, and that is just a good faith debate because somebody wants to know more about why you feel the way you feel, versus somebody that's coming to you because they are being instructed by some intelligence agency to have these discussions with you. Come on, we don't need to play make-believe anymore. Like, these people that were coming to me were all being instructed. So were there any persons that I did have conversations with that were not? Yes, of course. For example, there was this one Irish guy who was in support of Palestine. And I spoke to him about why he believed what he believed. And I genuinely feel that his intentions were pure. Here in Belfast, I 100% believe that his intentions were pure. And you know why? It's because of what he said. What he said was, he said, you know what? I want to get back to my life again. And I said, well, what's stopping you from doing that? He said, well, because knowing what's happening overseas, like all I can do is try and support, uh, come out and protest with these group of people. And, as long as this is happening, I'm always going to be coming out and protesting with these group of people because I feel so connected to it. And he's like, and he said, it just doesn't feel the same to me. He says that he can't go to a pub and have a drink with his friends knowing about what is happening abroad. And when I listened to him, I felt like his testimony was coming from a genuine place. And I was like, this person is somebody who truly believes in what he believes. And he is firmly standing in his activism. Whereas that student that was in my class I don't think that she did. I think that she was being antagonistic to try and bait me into saying like something against a particular group so that she could take that back to intelligence agencies. But this person that I talked to that was on the streets, that was in protest of Palestine, his reasoning for doing so was very legitimate. He was enmeshed into this activism. He felt like there was a shared history. Not only did he feel that, but he felt that genuinely what was happening was wrong. And he had some strong arguments for why he felt the way that he felt. And although some of those arguments I didn't agree with, I certainly respected his platform on which he spoke. I certainly respected himself. I respected that I respect this person and his right to hold those beliefs. And I certainly felt that it was like it was coming from a genuine place deep within his heart. And I told him that too. I said, you know what? I truly believe that you feel what you feel and that there is legitimacy in what you feel, and that the connection that you have to the Palestinians is legitimate and real and authentic. That's not to argue that when most Irish people come out and they protest in support of Palestine, that there is no authenticity in their protests. That's not to argue that when they speak about that there's no authenticity in their arguments. Some people are more eloquent than others. Some people can formulate a persuasive argument, and maybe he was good at that. But it was just at that one precise moment where he spoke about not being able to go to pubs and not being able to carry on with his life because he was so caught up in this activism of going out and protesting for the Palestinians. And that the reason why he was doing that is because he cared about what was going on. And I've seen these arguments genuinely held on both sides. I've seen Israelis, Jewish people hold these arguments as well. Like some people are holding these arguments because they truly care about Jewish people being safe. They genuinely care about no more attacks on Israel. They genuinely care about there being peace in the Middle East. And then, of course, you're going to have some people that just want there to be conflict and chaos all the time. And so going back to, I know it's kind of, sorry, I know it's tangential, but I think it's important to elaborate on that. But going back to where we left off with institutions in here in Northern Ireland using the Palestinian cause to uphold white supremacy. So what do I mean by that? For example, if you are holding a contrary view on the conflict in Israel and Palestine, or you're not holding a view at all, it's like you can be denied service, you can be denied entry into particular programs, you can be isolated. It's almost as if, like, if you don't have one of those bracelets on that says, like, you're in support of Palestine, it's like, show me your papers, but show me your bracelet. Like, there is a threshold guardian at the door of these institutions. So threshold guardian at the institutional door of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, threshold guardian at the Equality Commission of Northern Ireland, threshold guardian at ACSANI, the African Caribbean organization in Northern Ireland, or whatever the acronym means. There's a threshold guardian at the Red Cross. There's a threshold guardian at all of these organizations. And if you don't show them a bracelet that has Palestine on it, metaphorically speaking, then you are going to be denied entry, or you're going to be denied services. And that is the truth, ladies and gentlemen. That is the absolute truth. Now, who is the question? Who is putting that into circulation? Who is telling them to do that? Well, of course, it is intelligence agencies. Just as intelligence agencies have instructed and co-opted the anti-racist movements here in Northern Ireland. Now, you can't be an anti-racist movement without recognizing the true cause of racism. The true cause of racism, and recognizing the true victims of racism. But when you close your eyes to the true victims of racism, it undermines your entire movement. And when you use tropes that have been used, racialized tropes and stereotypes that have been used to demonize specific groups of people that have been marginalized by systems of white supremacy, that also undermines your anti-racist movement. For example, Takura Makoni, who was a person that is I think he's a policy officer at ACSANI. And he was somebody that I really wanted to support because of the alleged publications that were put out that, like, he was in a neighborhood and that somebody had spray painted some racialized, intimidating, well, I think it was racialized and it was intimidating, but it was essentially, I think what the sign said, the spray paint said, was that they were instructing him to move out. And it was a form of intimidation, right? And so when I read that article, I was like, well, this is wrong. Like, nobody should be intimidated and instructed in such a way to move outside of their home and to leave their neighborhood. And so I reached out to him and I said, you know what, I really, I sympathize with you in this way. I hold sympathy for you because you've experienced this incident, that this should not have occurred. And, if you need someone to talk to about that, I'm here. And I also wrote a publication on my blog that wasn't for me to get anything from ACSANI. It was me just showing solidarity with, hey, you shouldn't be going through this. And if somebody's intimidating you, know that I'm here in support of you. But what I learned about this person, this Takura Makoni person, ladies and gentlemen, is that he's really not an authentic person. He is really not a person that is anti-racist. He's actually, in some degree, upholding structures of white supremacy. So, for example, right now, I'm not getting Section 4 support. And I have to rely on going to like food banks until that support comes in. And I actually, in order for you to go to a food bank here in Northern Ireland, you have to have a referral. And his organization was an organization that actually, ladies and gentlemen, can give you a referral. And so I went to his organization to get a referral. And when I left with the referral, what I seen on the paper was physical ailment. So basically, what he put on the referral was the reason why I was seeking. So basically, what he notated on the referral was he put that this person is seeking food because they have physical ailments, because they're disabled, because they are suffering from mental illness, like all these things that didn't have anything to do with seeking food. All of these things that had nothing to do with receiving a food voucher. And so when I looked at it, I actually tore it up and I contacted him and I was like, dude, that was very disrespectful what you did. I had trust in you that you would actually do the right thing, but you didn't do the right thing. You tried to undermine me and throw me under the bus with these racialized tropes that we're seeing so often attached to Black Americans, and you're part of the problem. And ladies and gentlemen, he contacted me back and he was like, no, this is the only option that's available. And ladies and gentlemen, he is a liar. Takura Makoni is a liar. And how I know that he's a liar is because I've gone to subsequently, I've actually received my food bank vouchers from other organizations. And they have lists that you can choose from. And those things are not automatically put onto a food voucher. So basically he was putting those on the food voucher to be passive aggressive and to antagonize, to make it appear as if like I was, this person that was infirmed and disabled, and that I was mentally unstable, and that I was physically, having physical ailments. It was really disrespectful. And from that point on, I lost all respect for that person. And I'll never talk to that person again because of that. He sought to, what I believe is that he was instructed to do that by an Irish American intelligence agency, that they were. So there's been like this ongoing practice, especially when you're going through transnational repression. So let me divert from that for a moment so you can kind of understand where, like, the reason why he was doing that. When a person is going through transnational repression, state agents such as Irish intelligence agencies, the United States intelligence agencies, they need to discredit your testimony. They need to discredit your arguments. And the way in which they discredit that is by saying that you are mentally unstable, that you can't, that you're disabled, that you can't, like, your perception of reality is altered. And Irish American intelligence agencies, they have a lot of influence, and their influence comes from referent power. So referent power is that they can be charismatic and they can persuade these institutions and sometimes individual persons to engage in these practices. And sometimes referent power, sometimes the power can be reward power, where they're giving these persons, incentivizing these persons to engage in these practices to try and undermine you. And so what I think what was happening in that moment with Takura is that if we look back at his records, probably all the records of like the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, the Equality Commission for Northern Ireland, Queen's University Belfast, if we look, even Axani, if we look into these organizations and we look at the funding, we follow the money. We can see funding directly from the Irish government, probably intelligence agencies, as well as the US government and their intelligence agencies as well. And so what I think was happening is that Takura was either trying to get funding for Exani or get funding for himself, or, incentivize himself by putting that on my voucher. Now, to be clear, ladies and gentlemen, I've never done anything to Takura. I've never said anything against him. I've never texted him anything rude or I haven't, all of my communications with Takura has been respectful and professional. To be sure, when he was at the Let's Not Talk About Racism symposium, and he had raised some arguments, and I was supporting him in those arguments. I was the only person that was standing in solidarity while most of those people in the room was silent on the arguments that he had raised. He was standing in his truth about specific issues, and he had raised some questions to the audience, and everybody didn't. Most people ignored, or maybe was reluctant or afraid, or didn't feel necessary to answer the question that he had raised. And so I was trying to stand in solidarity with him, because I know what it's like to be the odd one out and be the person that is alone when it comes to feelings of oppression, intimidation. And I know that the space that he was coming from was that space of feeling intimidation and oppression because of where he felt intimidated in the past, if that event truly happened, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, as I supported him, the only time that I challenged Takura was when he spoke at, and this was last year, where he spoke at, last year, where he spoke at, he spoke during Frederick Douglass Week. And we know that Frederick Douglass is an American, and a Black American who escaped chattel slavery. And when he spoke during that week in support of Frederick Douglass, his arguments didn't have anything. So basically his speech did not include Black Americans. His speech was absent. So any persecution that happened to Black Americans, he didn't raise any of that in his speech. Nothing in his speech included what Black Americans went through, nor did it build on the legacy of Frederick Douglass. It didn't build on that experience that Frederick Douglass had in the United States, and the reason for why he came to Northern Ireland and what he sought to build. And the question that I raised to Takura during that speech, because it was a question open after he had that speech, it was question and answer, and I said, Takura, how can we build on Douglass's legacy without, how did I say it? I think I said, I forget how I said it, but I think, to paraphrase, I was like, yes, other people can talk about, use Frederick Douglass to talk about oppression, but how do we build on Douglass's legacy and not take away from his legacy and include Black Americans who have been persecuted? And perhaps he thought that I was trying to outshine him or call him out, but no, I wasn't. I was just saying, hey, you're standing before a room and you're speaking during a week where Black Americans were experiencing chattel slavery. Frederick Douglass came to Northern Ireland and he sought to teach about that. And one of his goals was to abolish slavery, and slavery was built on white supremacy. So why aren't you saying anything about that in your speech is what I was trying to get to. And I think the reason why that could have been is because his speech was a little bit watered down, and that he had these Irish American intelligence agencies putting a blackface in a high place, but really watering down the true cause of the abolition movement, and in a way that was disrespectful not only to Douglass, but disrespectful to Black Americans as well. And so I didn't hold that against Takura, and I was like, well, this is a teachable moment, and hopefully, if a person is in this position where they are speaking out or speaking, in support of Frederick Douglass or building on his legacy, I hope that they truly understand what he sought to accomplish and why he left the United States. Because oftentimes, for example, in that speech, Takura was talking about other migrants that have fled from their countries and fled to Northern Ireland, but he didn't acknowledge that Douglass was a refugee himself that had fled from the United States, that he was a Black refugee who fled white supremacy, chattel slavery, and he fled to Northern Ireland for protection. And he did not mention that. And I felt like that was really a disservice to Frederick Douglass' week and the legacy, and to his legacy. And so I bring this up, ladies and gentlemen, to say that sometimes you will be isolated when you stand in your truth and when you acknowledge wrong. And to reiterate, when I first met Takura, I thought it was going to be, let me not harp on that. You get the point. And so to bring that discussion to a close, I was disappointed that Takura put those entries onto my food voucher, because if Takura was truly educated in the history of Black Americans and knew about COINTELPRO and knew about drapetomania, he would have known that those were tropes and stereotypes that are placed on to Black Americans to undermine them and to discredit their activism, their testimony, and their experiences with discrimination and persecution. And that is somebody that I could never, ever align myself with in the future. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening to this podcast. I know that this was just, everywhere, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to bring all of these issues into one space. And this was an extemporaneous discussion that I wanted to have. And so while I was having this discussion, I thought, oh, well, that's good to talk about, or that's good to talk about. But next time I'm actually going to take notations and to formulate and structure the conversations that I do have on these podcasts. So the next podcast that we have, it is going to be quite structured. But there you have it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. If you are any person out there, you want to have a conversation with me, even if it's you, Takura, I'm open to having a conversation with you, but I know that you are not going to be open to having this conversation because you've already been conditioned by intelligence agencies or people in power to, they've given you a script and you've adopted yourself to that, and you're staying close to that. And that's okay. That's okay, because all will be revealed soon. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.